Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I continue sharing with you the story of Hùng and Tiểu, a family story filled with overlapping emotions, lingering pain, and choices that are anything but easy to make. This video is a continuation of the previous episode, where the sudden reappearance of their biological mother completely disrupted the seemingly stable lives of Hùng and Tiểu. In the last episode, the biological mother, who abandoned Hùng and Tiểu when they were still very young, unexpectedly returned after nearly 30 years of absence. Without warning, without any preparation, her arrival was like a powerful wave crashing into what had once been a calm lake, stirring up emotions and memories that the two siblings believed had long been buried. The simple, steady life they had struggled to build over the years suddenly became fragile, filled with unanswered questions. The biological mother returned with the hope of reclaiming the children she had missed throughout a long stretch of their lives. In her eyes was longing, regret, and words heavy with remorse, regrets for not being there during the most difficult years of their childhood. She spoke of time, of aging, of the fear of loneliness after nearly reaching the end of her life while still carrying the weight of unforgiven guilt. Yet no matter how gentle or desperate her words were, they could not immediately heal the deep scars etched into Hùng and Tiểu hearts. For Hùng, memories of his biological mother were faint and fragmented, mixed with a lingering sense of abandonment. He grew up deprived of maternal affection, forced to learn strength at an early age, hiding his pain behind a tough exterior. For Tiểu, those memories were tied to waiting by the door in vain, clinging to hope that never came, and enduring a sense of emptiness that stretched throughout her childhood. Even now, despite adulthood and lives of their own, their mother's return caused old emotions to resurface, clearer and heavier than ever before. Hùng and Tiểu now stood before an impossible choice. On one side was the woman who gave birth to them, returning with the wish to make amends. On the other was a past full of wounds that had taken them years to accept and move beyond. Neither of them could make a decision easily, because every choice carried emotional consequences that were difficult to predict. At their next meeting, the biological mother did not come empty-handed. She brought with her a large amount of money and assets, neatly laid out in front of the siblings, a silent declaration of her ability to compensate. The numbers were substantial, clear, and undeniable. She hoped that material wealth could fill part of the void left by their difficult childhood, hoping they would accept her return and allow her to become their mother once more. The atmosphere grew heavy. Silence filled the space, leaving only the exchanged glances of three people, each carrying different thoughts. For the mother, it was anxious anticipation. For Hùng and Tiểu, it was an indescribable feeling, a mix of bitterness and a cold, sobering clarity. They understood all too well that years ago, she had left because of money, choosing material gain over maternal responsibility. And now, upon returning, money was once again what she offered. That truth left them no choice but to reflect deeply. They did not deny the value of wealth, nor did they dismiss the hardships their mother might have endured. But for them, money could never replace the childhood years they lost, could never buy back the moments of illness endured without a mother's care, and could never erase the feeling of abandonment that had followed them throughout their lives. After much reflection and emotional confrontation, the siblings made the most honest choice they could. They refused the money and assets placed before them. Not out of pride, nor resentment, but because they understood that family bonds cannot be measured by material wealth. Things offered too late, no matter how luxurious, can never fully compensate for what has already been lost. For Hùng and Tiểu, family is not defined by how much money one has, but by presence, love, and responsibility from the very beginning. And that decision, whether calm or painful, was one rooted in a clear understanding of the true value of the words, family bond, in their lives. However, it was precisely the return of the biological mother that unintentionally became a silent cut, piercing deeply into the heart of the adoptive mother, the woman who had devoted herself, sacrificed, and stayed by Hung and Tiểu side for nearly their entire lives. She said nothing, offered no complaints, yet every subtle change in her gaze, every quiet moment of silence, carried a pain too deep to be named. After so many upheavals, after misunderstandings and distances that once pushed the family to the brink of fracture, she and the children had only just found their way back to one another. Meals had grown warmer, everyday conversations once again filled the small house. For the first time in a long while, she truly felt that she had a complete family, that her silent sacrifices had finally been understood and appreciated. Yet that sense of peace had not lasted long before the appearance of the biological mother made everything feel unsteady once again. Even though Hung and Tiểu never said a word that could hurt her, even though they continued to treat her with the same respect and love as always, a quiet sense of displacement began to take root in the adoptive mother's heart. She started to question her place in that home, in the hearts of the two children she had raised since they were very young. She feared that no matter how much the children professed their love, deep down, the biological mother would always be the irreplaceable blood bond. She feared that her presence was ultimately only that of someone who had filled a void, someone who came later and could be forgotten at any moment once the real mother returned. These thoughts silently eroded the self-worth and sense of security she had only just begun to reclaim. On some nights, she sat alone in the familiar room, gazing at objects tied to each stage of Hung and Tiểu growth. Each item evoked memories of hardship, sleepless nights during illness, simple meals filled with love despite their modest means. Everything was still there, yet the feeling of belonging seemed to be slowly slipping beyond her reach. As her sense of hurt and inadequacy grew, she no longer had the courage to face it. She did not want to become an emotional burden to the children, nor did she want to hear any further explanations or reassurances, because deep down she knew that some fears cannot be soothed by words alone. In the end, she chose to leave in silence, without blame, without resentment, quietly packing up and stepping away from the life she once considered her entire world. When Hung and Tiểu realized that their adoptive mother had left, both were thrown into near panic. The familiar house suddenly felt unbearably empty, her absence evident in every corner, every pause. There were no more familiar footsteps, no more quiet figure tending to everything as she always had. The sense of loss struck suddenly, leaving them unprepared. Lythieuca was deeply worried as well. She understood better than anyone the sacrifices that woman had made for Hung and Tiểu, and the silent wounds she had hidden for so long. Her departure without a word filled Lythieuca with unease, sensing that this was not merely a simple trip away, but something born from a deep, unspoken pain. No one knew where she had gone, nor had she left behind any message or sign. That silence only made the worry heavier. The whole family quickly split up to search, carrying a fragile hope that they might find her before things became worse. Hung searched the familiar places she used to visit, every street, every corner tied to her daily routine. He tried to remain calm, but inside, turmoil surged. With every place she was not found, his worry grew heavier. He feared that his own inattentiveness had caused her to suffer yet another unnecessary wound. Tiểu asked everyone she could, neighbors, acquaintances, her voice trembling with fear. Inside her heart swelled a deep sense of unease, mixed with regret and guilt. She feared that while being consumed by her own past and tangled emotions, she had unintentionally neglected the woman who had always stood quietly behind her, loving and protecting her with everything she had. At that moment, the two siblings shared only one fear, that the woman who had sacrificed her entire life for them, who had always placed their happiness above all else, might once again be hurt. That fear followed them with every searching step, seeping into every thought, a fear no one dared to fully imagine, yet no one could push away. At last, after hours of searching filled with restless anxiety, they finally found her in a small house in a remote area. The house was simple and modest, isolated from the surrounding community, enveloped by a silence that felt almost overwhelming. There were no passing voices, no familiar warmth of a lively home, only a lingering stillness that seemed to mirror the state of mind of the person inside. The adoptive mother sat quietly alone in that small house. She appeared noticeably thinner, her shoulders slightly hunched, as though the weight in her heart had drained her of the strength to stand tall. Her face bore clear signs of exhaustion after days of relentless thinking, mixed with a quiet sorrow she could not put into words. Her eyes gazed into the distance, unfocused, as if drifting back through old memories, years she had devoted entirely to raising and caring for two children not bound to her by blood. The moment Hung and Tiểu stepped inside, the small house seemed to shrink under the weight of emotions that had yet to be named. The adoptive mother flinched slightly, but when she realized it was the two of them, she said nothing. She simply turned away, avoiding their eyes, as if fearing that one more second of eye contact would cause everything she had been holding back to spill over. That silence shattered Tiểu composure. All the worry, fear, and guilt she had carried throughout the search finally found an outlet. She broke down in tears, her sobs echoing through the quiet space, tearing apart the stillness that had settled over the house. Tiểu rushed forward and wrapped her arms tightly around her mother, holding on as if afraid that letting go for even a moment would cause her to disappear once again. Through broken sobs, Tiểu trembled as she said that she and her brother had never, not even once, thought of leaving her behind. She said that no matter what happened, no matter how the past returned or in what form, the woman standing before her would always be her anchor, her family, the one who had walked with her through the hardest years of her life. Her words were not ornate or carefully crafted, but they carried every ounce of sincerity and fear of loss she held in her heart. Hung stood nearby, silently watching the two most important women in his life. His eyes were heavy with thought, yet when he finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady. He said that for him and Tiểu, there was only one true mother, the woman who had stayed by their side when they had nothing, the one who accepted hardship and sacrificed her youth to raise two children she had not given birth to. He spoke of the hardest years of his life, when it was this very mother who stayed close, worrying over every meal, every night's sleep, every illness. He did not deny the existence of their biological mother, nor did he deny the bond of blood, but he understood clearly that motherhood is not defined by genetics alone, but by presence and love shown day after day. He said plainly that no matter how much wealth their biological mother brought with her, no matter how capable she was of compensating materially, it could never change the truth that the woman who raised him and Tiểu held the most important place in their hearts. His words carried no resentment, only a firm affirmation of his choice and of the values he and his sister had always held close. Both Hung and Tiểu urged her to return home. They told her that the house was still her place, that the family still needed her just as before, and that her absence had left an emptiness no one could ignore. They promised that there would never come a day when they would abandon the woman who had raised, protected, and loved them with her entire life, for anyone, or for any sudden reappearance. Those words lingered in the quiet space, each sentence gently pressing against the silence the adoptive mother had been holding onto for so long. She still did not turn back, still did not speak, but her shoulders began to tremble slightly, as though emotions long suppressed were slowly rising to the surface. That small, remote house was no longer merely a temporary refuge, but a place filled with unspoken words and unresolved feelings, opening into a moment where the decision ahead had yet to be made. Hearing the sincere words from Hung and Tiểu, the adoptive mother could no longer hold herself together. Silent tears began to fall, not sobs or cries, but tears born of deep emotion, of feelings long suppressed that had finally been touched. She quickly raised her hand to wipe her eyes, but the more she tried, the more the tears flowed, as if all the hurt, vulnerability, and quiet insecurity she had carried over time were rushing back at once. She was moved that the two children standing before her still remembered her with such compassion and love. She knew well that during the years she raised Hung and Tiểu, there were times she had been too strict, moments when the pressure of life caused her to speak words that unintentionally hurt them. There were periods when she herself feared that her harshness might create a distance that could never be repaired. Yet standing in this moment, she realized that her children had silently let all of that go. She felt grateful that even now, when facing such a difficult choice, Hung and Tiểu still chose to stand by her. Not through grand promises, but through their actions, through their anxious search for her, through their presence in this remote place simply to say that they needed her and could not bear to lose her once again. To the adoptive mother, that was more precious than any form of compensation. And yet, after those emotional moments, it was she who spoke up to counsel the children. Her voice was slow and steady, carrying the depth of someone who had endured many losses and difficult choices in life. She did not speak through tears or impulsive emotion, but with careful thought, as if she had wrestled with herself long before finally giving voice to these words. She said that no matter what, the other woman was still Hung and Tiểu biological mother. That was a truth that could not be denied, no matter how painful the past had been. She understood the feeling of abandonment, and she understood the wounds her children had carried throughout their growing years. But precisely because she understood, she did not want them to carry yet another burden of regret into the future. She worried that if today Hung and Tiểu rejected their biological mother too decisively, too coldly, there might come a time when, as years passed and emotions settled, they would blame themselves. She feared that when there was no longer any chance to say one more word, they would be left living with the question, what if, a question that never has a complete answer. The adoptive mother gently advised them to give their biological mother a chance. Not immediate forgiveness, and not instant acceptance as if nothing had ever happened, but simply time. Time for her to face her own mistakes, time to try to make amends for the shortcomings of the past, even if they could never be fully repaired. She said that they should not abandon their biological mother now because of past mistakes, in the same way that woman once abandoned them. She did not want her children to repeat the pain that they themselves had suffered, nor to become the ones who caused hurt, regardless of the circumstances. To her, preserving kindness and compassion was the most important thing, even when doing so was far from easy. Those words were spoken with the full sincerity of a mother who placed her children's happiness above her own emotions. She did not speak to push them away, nor to deny her place in the family, but only hoped that whatever choice Hung and Tiểu made, it would not become a burden they carried in their hearts later on. The small house fell once again into silence, a space where unspoken thoughts still lingered, suspended in the air, waiting for the decisions yet to come. Those words from the adoptive mother cut deeply into Tiểu and Hung's hearts. Not because they felt blamed, and not because they were being forced into anything, but because they understood that every sentence came from compassion and sacrifice. And it was precisely that understanding that made the weight on their hearts so heavy. What stood before them now was no longer a simple choice, but two immense bonds of love resting on their shoulders at the same time. On one side was the mother who had sacrificed her entire life for them, the woman who set aside her own happiness, accepted hardship, loneliness, and even strictness toward herself in order to raise two children she did not give birth to. Every meal, every night's sleep, every year of Hung and Tiểu growth bore the quiet imprint of her presence. To them, she was not just a mother, but the only pillar they had relied on throughout a long life marked by deprivation. Yet on the other side was their biological mother, carrying a past filled with pain and regret. Even though memories of her were tied to abandonment and loss, the undeniable truth remained: she was the one who gave them life. Her return, however late, however clumsy, brought with it questions that had never found answers. Does a person truly have the right to completely reject their own origins? And must forgiveness always come hand in hand with full acceptance? Both siblings fell into silence. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because too many thoughts flooded their minds all at once. Each of them was facing themselves, their memories, their gratitude, and resentments that had yet to fully fade. No one dared to speak first, fearing that even a single word might cause further pain to someone they loved. Hung felt the conflict tearing at him. He understood that his adoptive mother's words were spoken for their sake, to spare them from future regret. Yet at the same time, he could not shake the fear that if he took even one step back, the family he had struggled to protect for so many years might no longer remain whole. His silence was not coldness, but the sign of a decision too heavy to be made lightly. Tieu San was no different. Her heart was tangled to the point of suffocation. She did not want to hurt her adoptive mother ever again, nor did she want her to feel replaced. Yet she was also afraid that an absolute rejection of her biological mother would become a lingering wound she would carry for the rest of her life. She did not know which choice was right, nor how to preserve both bonds without causing pain to anyone. The space around them seemed to still, weighed down by an unspoken heaviness. Their eyes met briefly, then quickly turned away, as no one had the courage to look directly into the pain reflected in the other's gaze. Each of them understood that the decision ahead would not only affect themselves, but could alter the fate and emotions of the entire family. Will Hung and Tieu San follow their adoptive mother's advice and give their biological mother another chance? Or will they stand firm in protecting their present family, despite the blood ties that have already caused so much pain? And will the choice they are about to make once again force someone to leave in heartbreak, leaving behind emptiness that may never truly be filled? Stay tuned for the next episode to discover what happens next.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Nay thì mình tiếp tục làm video về câu chuyện của Tiểu San và Hùng nha mọi người, trong tiếp diễn cái câu chuyện mà nhận lại người mẹ. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều vì đã theo dõi và ủng hộ cho kênh của mình nhé. Mình đang làm cái gì ta? Cái này này. Tạm biệt mọi người nhé. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video tiếp theo nhé. Bấm cái tóc lại mới được cho nó gọn gàng. Hey, yeah.